From Florida's capital, this is Power Play.
An axe, not a pen, may be writing the new Florida state budget. Will voters get to lower their property taxes in November in exchange for a higher sales tax? Will justice finally come to a man wrongly imprisoned for more than 20 years? And will Democrats in their presidential primary actually get a vote that counts? All that on Power Play with our guests, Linda Kleindienst of the South Florida Sun-Sentinel and Joe Follick of the New York Times Florida newspapers. So will it be an axe rather than a pen writing the state budget?
I think it's going to be a bloody axe when they start chopping at the social service programs, the medically needy program. Public schools could lose up to $1.5 billion next year.
A Supreme Court justice today called it a murder, used the word suicide. If this is a sober-minded jurist using this kind of rhetoric in the middle of March, what's it going to look like by the middle of April when they really start cutting these things?
And will folks start seeing the impact of these cuts, if there is really an impact in cities and counties and school districts, by the time the elections roll around in November, and will it be a factor?
Well, the state cuts will take effect in July. People will see the immediate effects, especially in the public schools when the kids go back in August, September. And then at the same time, the cities and counties are making their budget cuts looking for the next year. So I think people will finally pay attention.
Well, I think it's not just the budget, it's the tax cuts as well. It's all starting to accumulate a little bit. And it's been stuff people saw on the paper, they saw it on TV. It hasn't hit home yet. But now, in Sarasota, for example, Cincinnati Reds leaving the state for Arizona possibly, you can directly tie that to the taxes. When I walk around soccer fields and the supermarkets around here, people aren't talking about rainy day funds, but they're sure talking about the libraries being shut down on Monday in Tallahassee. People are starting to notice.
Against that bleak news, the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission with a proposal for a constitutional amendment cutting property taxes by 25% if voters go for it in November, but a higher sales tax. How's that going to fly with the people?
Well, I think in South Florida, people who still have very high property tax bills are going to look at that and drool. The property owners. The question is, will you be able to convince the millions of renters in this state to go for that? Because they get no property tax relief. They're going to have to pay that higher sales tax every time they go to the store. And that may be a tough sell for them.
I think in a lot of ways it's a lot more appealing than Amendment 1, which only appealed to a certain small segment of the people, homesteaders. This one's going to have something for everybody, at least in the short term. If you're a business, if you're a snowbird, these people feel left out after Amendment 1. They're going to feel good about this. Are they going to be thinking about looking at a Publix supermarket receipt 3 years from now that says 9%, 9.5% sales tax at the bottom? I don't know if they'll think about it when they vote in November.
Maybe the best feel-good story of this very bleak session, Alan Kratzer in prison for more than 20 years for crimes he didn't commit. Claims bill working its way through fairly simply. What's going to happen with that?
Well, it looks like he's going to get a $1.25 million settlement out of the state. The governor met with him. The governor has called the House Speaker and the Senate President on his behalf. Looks like this bill is going to sail through pretty easily.
And everybody's agreeing on both sides of the aisle, Joe?
Ron, well, I think you're right. I think in a tough budget year, everything's going to revolve around the budget this session. In a tough budget year, people are desperate to grab onto something that feels even a little good. This might be something that helps these guys out.
Well, the soap opera continues in the Democrats' presidential primary from January. But now the key players are the candidates themselves, Clinton and Obama. Seems they have to come to some accord. Are they motivated to do that?
Well, it seems the party can't do it, so somebody's got to come forward and make sure that the Democrats in Florida have their votes counted. They're all looking pretty silly at this point, and I think they're taking a chance that Democrats may not go to the polls in November in Florida, or they could go to the polls and vote for a Republican.
Joe, any different thoughts?
This thing's evolving from a lampoon, something that was a joke, to somewhat of a tragedy. If you get to Denver and you don't have people from Florida and Michigan there, what kind of joke is it going to be then? They got to be something.
After hours, Florida lawmakers tend to socialize with one another, pizza parties, the food's not important, but gathering together, is it a violation of Florida's open meetings and records laws?
Well, they say it isn't, but we can't promise you that they didn't discuss legislation. The House Republicans did it, and now the Senate Democrats have met and had dinner without telling anybody.
Florida sunshine laws are touted nationally as an example, but when you read the exact words, there's so much latitude for lawmakers that it's up to them to enforce what, if they're meeting the law or not. What I think people could learn from Charlie Crist is this: drown us in access. Charlie Crist led us into fundraisers in the governor's mansion. It was great the first couple times, and then you start thinking, you know what, I'd rather go watch Wheel of Fortune. I'm going to pass this up.
Well, as you all are the watchdogs, why aren't you going to those pizza parties and after-hours meals?
If we knew, we would be there, believe me, knocking on the door.
I was hungry last night, Ron. I would have loved to have went.
Okay, thank you. Go to the Safety Review for all the latest political news. We'll see you next time on Power Play. Thank you very much, Linda Kleindienst and Joe Follett.